In the remote areas of South UP, Maguindanao, two young girls carry a trauma that words alone can barely describe. They were raped. According to Teduray tradition, there are three ways to resolve this situation. First, the family of the victim may be compensated with money or material goods. In this case, the issue was settled with a horse and 6,000 pesos cash in exchange for their silence. The second option, the rapist marries the victim. Among the Teduray, this is seen as a way to erase the offense and embarrassment gained by the victim. And the third, which is rarely chosen, is to bring the case to court. But formal justice often remains a distant option, overshadowed by the tribal council's efforts to mediate and preserve peace between two families involved. In these remote regions, traditions often outweighs legal justice, leaving many women vulnerable, silenced, and trapped in a cycle of abuse. In this presentation, we aim to analyze the documentary Kapalit ng Katahimikan by Cara David, identify the ethical and unethical issues that were observed and unobserved, and third, explain the importance of upholding ethical principle in media reporting.
In any journalistic work, especially ones that deal with trauma, abuse, and indigenous cultures, ethics are vital. It is crucial to find the balance between the responsibility to the public and the responsibility to the people involved, especially those who are already vulnerable and traumatized. The following are ethical dilemmas faced in the documentary. The first major ethical dilemma is truth-telling versus victim protection. Journalists have a moral and professional duty to present the truth, to tell stories as they are. But how do they do that when it involves victims that are children or individuals with mental disabilities? Revealing too many details could expose their identities, re-traumatize them, or even endanger those victims. How much of the truth should be shown when in doing so, risk exposing the already traumatized? The second dilemma faced is cultural sensitivity versus human rights. One of the most striking parts of the documentary is the way the indigenous community, particularly the Teduray community, handles rape cases through arranged marriages or financial settlements. While this practice is part of a long-standing cultural tradition, it clashes with the basic human rights of the victims, especially when the victims are minors or mentally disabled. Lastly, we have objectivity versus morality. As journalists, it's crucial to stay fair and neutral. However, when presented with such obvious injustices, such as children being raped and then forced into marriage, how can one stay objective? How can one present the image of a young girl being forced to marry her rapist and not react emotionally? These are the major ethical dilemmas faced in the documentary, and in cases as sensitive as this, it shows how much ethical choices or principles affect how the case is being told and perceived.
Cara David's documentary Kapalit ng Katahimikan ethically addresses sensitive issues of rape and abuse within the Teduray tribe in South UP, Maguindanao. By upholding confidentiality, honesty, and respect for vulnerable subjects, the film achieved significant impact, raising public awareness, driving social change, empowering victims, and mobilizing demands for justice. Its responsible storytelling demonstrates how ethical journalism can expose systemic injustices while protecting and amplifying marginal voices. The documentary upholds ethical practices of confidentiality and anonymity to protect the privacy of human subjects, as emphasized by Kofil. It uses aliases and censors faces to conceal identities. Instead of direct interviews, some narratives are presented in writing, further ensuring privacy. This measure aligns with ethical considerations in reporting sensitive data. Here is a short clip of practicing confidentiality.
Ang taong gulang na si Dolores, di niya tunay na pangalan.
The documentary Kapalit ng Katahimikan maintains honesty and integrity by accurately reporting findings, avoiding falsification, and supporting claims with evidence. It incorporates testimonies from victims, witnesses, and family members. Written letters and detailed testimonies further strengthen credibility, ensuring truthful and contextualized reporting. This approach aligns with ethical standards of honesty and integrity in documentary filmmaking. Okay, so lastly, the documentary Kapalit ng Katahimikan demonstrates respect for vulnerable populations by handling sensitive interviews with care, as highlighted by Hassan. Cara David and her team avoid direct interviews with traumatized children, and they opt instead for written narratives to protect them. David also adjusts her tone to create a safe space to comfort distress interviewees, and stops questioning when emotions become overwhelming. These actions reflect ethical journalism by prioritizing the well-being of vulnerable subjects over sensationalism. Now, let's move on to the effects. Kapalit ng Katahimikan raised awareness about Terodite tribe abuse through ethical reporting, protecting identities while sharing credible, moving testimonies. This sparked national dialogue on indigenous rights and strengthened calls for justice. Now, Kapalit ng Katahimikan also drove change through ethical storytelling, amplifying victims' voices to spur policy action and public demands for justice. The documentary's powerful testimonies, as along the notes, transform awareness into concrete reforms, proving journalism's role in advancing social justice. Lastly, Kapalit ng Katahimikan empowered victims through ethical reporting. This exposure of systemic abuse inspired tangible actions like Castro's petition, proving journalism's power to transform victims into advocates for justice.
After watching Cara David's documentary titled Kapalit ng Katahimikan, it can be seen that the production team strictly adhered to established media ethical standards. However, there were times that they were not able to give the full context of the situation.
The documentary's purpose was to expose the traumatic sexual abuse experience among indigenous communities, particularly Dolores. They focus on how tribal councils handle such cases, showing certain customary practices that include forced marriage between victims and perpetrators or financial compensation, also known as bayad sa kahihiyan. Though the aim was to speak on behalf of the victim, this strategy placed their village's cultural practices under a largely negative light, quite possibly missing complexities and historical circumstances behind them. Though they did mention Rido or ubusan ng lahi, they did not fully examine this context, and this might have resulted in unknowingly overlooking deeper cultural forces involved, which are necessary to creating culturally appropriate and effective interventions. The lack of context occurred when Rido was mentioned during the interview with the Ministry of Social Services and Development, given the timestamp 11 minutes and 32 seconds. By full context, Rido, according to Al-Kalam, academic research indicates that clan wars, or it is locally referred as Rido, are a prevalent source of conflict in the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao. Rido involves violent retaliation between feuding families or clans. While one study suggests that Rido may appear to stem from religious or moral traditions, more recent literature points to its strong social roots. It is often seen as a social norm where families or clans are expected to respond violently when wronged, and members are expected to support these actions as part of pursuing justice. In a research conducted by Kathleen Solis for the Advances in Social Norms training at the University of Philadelphia, she noted that social pressure plays a significant role in reinforcing Rido-related behaviors. People tend to believe that others expect them to retaliate when offended, and that family or clan members are likewise expected to stand by each other. Solis further explained that social penalties also exist. Refusing to retaliate can lead to being seen as weak or cowardly, and refusing to support one's clan may result in being treated as an outsider. These expectations are interwoven with broader social factors like the concepts of honor, dignity, kinship, and the idea of peace, all of which help sustain the practice of Rido. In the documentary, the representation of the decision of the tribal council to allow a mentally handicapped girl to marry her trigger warning rapist was made without a detailed analysis of the cultural justification behind such a decision. This representation, although we all know that it is a serious injustice, it did not provide a sensitive analysis of the cultural context and the perceptions of the community, thus threatening to alienate the very communities the documentary aimed to support because it puts the whole community and their cultures on the negative light, instead of specifically fighting the injustice faced by the women of their community.
Now, for the observed effects for not following these ethical considerations. The lack of cultural sensitivity or context in documentaries pertaining to IPs could have unforeseen effects, including perpetuating stereotypes regarding indigenous peoples or creating a sense of cultural inferiority. By not adequately contextualizing these practices within their cultural and historical contexts, the documentary could have inadvertently contributed to a narrative that berates their community and all of its traditions. According to Media Smarts, stereotypical media representation can be harmful to the way indigenous youth view themselves, resulting in internalized racism and lower self-esteem. While a study by Adonis on 2011 at Australian Catholic University bring into focus how Philippine documentaries have consistently represented indigenous people through colonial lenses that affirm a sense of otherness and cultural inferiority. These misrepresentations not only influence public attitudes but also inform policy choices and have a significant impact on the lives of indigenous people and communities. Repeated exposure to these stereotypes can cause internalization of negative beliefs both among non-indigenous audiences and within indigenous communities themselves, leading to a continued discrimination and systematic barriers. According to United Nations, to address these concerns, it is essential that documentaries engage indigenous peoples in the process of storytelling, such that their stories and histories are represented respectfully and honestly. Not only that this contribute to genuine representation, but it also gives indigenous people the power to reclaim their own stories and subvert dominant narratives that have suppressed them for so long.
Considering the overall handling of sensitive issues and the significant positive impacts noted, the documentary largely upheld ethical standards in journalism. Yes, we believe that Cara David's documentary entitled Kapalit ng Katahimikan is ethical. While it may have lacked full cultural contextualization, this can be understood considering that the primary focus of the documentary was to expose and address the injustices of sexual abuse, especially among vulnerable individuals in indigenous communities. It is important to recognize that, in practice, not all media ethics can be perfectly upheld in every report. However, what matters is the sincere effort to adhere to most of the core ethical principles. In this case, the documentary strongly upheld ethical standards such as confidentiality, truth-telling, and showing compassion and respect. Therefore, despite some limitations, we believe that the documentary remains a responsible and ethical work of journalism.